Welcome to First Answers. This is episode 6 in the series, A Parent's Guide to Gender Identity. In this episode, learn how children form their inner core of knowledge about themselves and learn about the family's role as a small community where children are influenced and how the social world around them can affect them. These experience areas will give you ideas about what you can do to promote healthy gender identities in your children. Visit firstanswers.com to find more about the podcast and answers for 21st century parents.
In the last episode about gender identity, I proposed that the process of acquiring identity follows these steps: child's experience, then the interpretation of it, then confirming or adding additional information, then validating or finding out if it is true. And I propose that you can participate as a parent in every step of that process if you'll communicate with your children, ask them about themselves. What do you believe about yourself here? What do you think you're like there? And so on. In this episode, I'm going to talk about 3 experience areas, which are the seedbed for gender identity formation. While there is not complete consensus amongst scientists about how identity is formed, it is still fair, in my opinion, to conclude that children are born and live through experience areas, 3 of them. And these are the knowledge or self-knowledge they gain by and from themselves, watching their parents' example, reflecting on themselves, experimenting, testing things out, and so forth. Number 2 is knowledge from their participation in their family. And 3, what they learn and know from the larger social community or society. Now, why do I believe this? Well, I come to this idea from meeting with people who suffer or have suffered from a distorted or limited sense of identity. If you were seated in my chair, it would be clear to you that these individuals typically are missing quality experience and knowledge from one or more of the 3 experience areas. A child's participation in these 3 areas, if effective, will give them knowledge and experience to form a solid sense of identity. And if you aim to help a struggling youth, one of the best ways you can is by arranging additional experiences for him. You can impact what he knows about himself and help him know how to improve his participation in his family and his community, and when he's quiet and is thinking about himself and alone. Now, this can enhance the positive experiences available to him in the larger social community of which he is a part. Now, please consider the following 3 experience areas and how you might be able to have a positive impact on your children's experiences and therefore impact the formation of their gender identity. Experience area 1. This is the brain, self-knowledge, and an inner core where the nature of a child's experience and interpretation can promote or fail to promote these positive identity qualities. Now, the inner core of identity is made up of beliefs, emotions, memories, or actions that individuals generate. The brain gathers information about the self, including perceptions, spoken language, written language, feelings, and observations, while learning to adjust to many different circumstances. And it stores this self-knowledge, or the inner core knowledge, into 3 categories. I am, which is knowledge of oneself that originates within each person. Me and myself, which is self-knowledge in relation to others and how a person is treated. And 3, not me, which includes experiences, ideas, or judgments not accepted as part of oneself. You might think, well, these are strange and so on, but if you think about them for a minute, it'll be like this. You ask a child, well, what do you think you're like? And he'll say, well, I am, or I'm not like that. But most of the time he'll say, well, I am happy, I'm cheerful, and so on. And then the idea of me and how I think about myself. Well, how do you think about yourself? Well, I think that I'm kind, or I think I'm happy, or I think I'm not successful. And then there's the 3rd category, which is this is not me. And most people are quite familiar with that because they'll say, well, I wasn't quite myself. Or, well, that's not me. I don't fit into that. and they are appealing to one of these three categories of knowledge. I am, me and myself, and not me. Now, the brain then organizes knowledge that a child puts in these three categories into information about himself into what are called perceptual frames, which controls one behavior as maturation takes place. Now, perceptual frames are clusters of cells in the brain which record one's experiences. Every experience you have or I have is supported by an actual cluster of neurons in the brain. Okay, and by virtue of how much experience we have, the perceptual frame can be rich. That means I've had a lot of experiences, or impoverished, which means I haven't had many experiences in that area. If rich, a person is more likely to think and act consistently with the knowledge in that frame. For example, a child who has had a lot of experience meeting people will choose to be proactive when that situation arises, and a child with limited experience will tend to avoid it. Okay, does this mean that it will be useful to help children have many experiences with gender ideas? Well, think about that, and the answer is yes. If I have a lot of experiences being a healthy, satisfactory male, if I have a lot of experiences being a happy and satisfactory female, it's something that a parent can do to promote success for their children. Now, these clusters appear in the brain as paired opposites. That is, if there is something good, then right next to it will be what is not good. Emotions are paired the same way. Each has an opposite. Love and all experiences with it are paired with not love or fear. Usually not loving or being loved means fear as related to one's experience. For example, a girl is dating a boy and feelings are developing. One day he tells her he loves her, and the next morning she feels fear because she worries about whether or not she does and what it means if she accepts his love or being loved by him. Quite often, love is on the far side of fear because they occur together. So a lot of young people dating will grow in their feelings of love, and somebody will say, I love you, and the other person gets frightened. Now, the brain gradually collects information obtained from these experiences and interprets until enough exists for the brain to create a concept of self. It might be less complete and mature to begin with, and additional knowledge will add to it. For example, a person could answer, I am happy, or I'm not happy, because this person understands his feelings. But when the brain lacks emotional knowledge, the individual would not know whether he's happy or not, and may be confused about emotions. Now, you might think, well, that's probably rare, or that's probably not going to happen. Well, you might not have met a person who has been mistreated during childhood, so much so that they've spent all their time watching in suspicion about other people and have hardly any time to reflect or think on themselves. If you said to this individual, what are you feeling? Long pause. They may not know. They might think, this is a hard question. Why are you asking me this? Now, I want to give you some samples of children's inner core beliefs about themselves. Some of these are good and some are not, but here's a good one. I can make choices and be responsible. I'm smart. I know how to write. I am happy. My body brings me pleasure. Okay, my mother loves me. I am not going to criticize myself. I can play computer games. I'm not like my stuffed toy. I can work hard. I am a boy. I am a girl. I can play by myself. Now, with those bits of information available to every child, let's take a look at that and say, what are the challenges to a healthy inner core so that you'll know what those are and can protect your children or avoid them so that you can help promote a positive sense of identity in your children. So, what are the challenges in gathering self-knowledge in the first stage? The most crucial is the idea of freedom to choose. If for any reason agency is reduced or eliminated, there will be a reduction in believable self-knowledge that a child can have about himself. It's just like if you're an over-controlling parent, then you prevent the child from acquiring information about himself. So you can imagine what happens when children have an inherited cognitive disorder like autism or ADHD. Their abilities to engage, interpret, and validate will be limited because they often have difficulty managing their thoughts. Mentally ill children are in a similar situation as our children who suffer from periodic depression and anxiety. Children who are abused, traumatized, and or neglected often tend to have identity-related problems in their lives. These individuals may have difficulty because they're prevented from having experiences and interpreting that gives them the inner core of self-knowledge. I repeat, the importance of having children acquire knowledge about themselves, learning how to foster it by giving them experiences, teaching them and telling them about themselves, and then occasionally checking to say, would you like to tell me who you are and what you think about this and how do you see that and what do you think you're like and so on. Well, what are the opportunities for you to strengthen your children's inner core of self-knowledge? You can involve children in predictable routines they succeed at doing and help them see that boys and girls could do many good things. 2, invite your children to take time to think about who they want to be, tell you about it, and present both masculinity and femininity in a positive light. You could also help your children validate their own thoughts by thinking of themselves and reflecting on what they believe to be true about themselves. What do you believe to be true? Why is this true? Well, do you think that's true? Well, why not? See, and so you're just asking questions that invite them to talk about their inner core. Now, ensure children understand the role of agency or freedom by asking them, how do you see that? What do you mean when you say that? And so on. Provide opportunities for children to talk, voice an opinion, tell about their experiences. I promise that I've seen several kids who are so busy worrying about whether or not they're obeying their parents correctly that if you said to them, I'd like to know what you think about this, what's your opinion? They'll say, well, I don't know. And they don't. You could also have regular long talks and include some topics or discussion about positive gender qualities. What's good about being a boy? What's good about being a girl? Now, ask these questions and then afterward, make a practice of asking what they learned. What did you learn from this conversation? Anything? Display warmth and love and tell your children you always want to know what they think. Invite your children to tell what ideas they have about themselves after they've had some experience. Ask them how true they believe them to be or not true. If children express negative or otherwise inaccurate judgments about themselves, ask them to disconfirm or rethink them and give them a new interpretation, and so on. Now, these are all opportunities and possible challenges to the development of children's inner core. And I repeat, the inner core of self-knowledge is an experience area that children will have in order to learn about themselves as males and females. Well, what's experience area 2? This is the family as a small community where parents and children together promote or fail to promote healthy gender identity beliefs and qualities. Well, it's not new news that a child's family experience is the first practical laboratory where children try out and believe about themselves by translating thoughts into actions. Their actions are designed to validate or invalidate what they believe. Okay, I believe I'm strong, so I'm going to wrestle down my brother. If I can do that, I think, okay, yes. I believe I'm strong, I'm going to wrestle down my older sister. She puts me to the floor, well, I'm at least not that strong. Now, the knowledge acquired from one's own thoughts, reflections, interpretation, and experience can be added to and validated through contact with others. Any child can test what he thinks to be true about himself in his association with family members. I've used an example of a boy who thought he was dumb. I can give you an example of a girl. And so that girls can be smart. She can get high test grades. People will say, gee, you're smart, Gene, and so on. Now, what all this means is that families are places where children learn new things and validate what they already believe about themselves. Now, remember that the people in this family community are those who know each other best, and therefore their comments and reactions usually have added weight. Now, the emotional conditions in a family are among the strongest humans ever feel. The emotional conditions are such that they last a long time. And so there's strong motivation for children to belong, and for this reason, they will be engaged in family activities. This is one reason why a quality family life is so important to the growth of a positive gender identity. Now let's look at the conditions in most families that play a central role in gender identity formation. A developing child would and could be affected by all of the following while learning to act on the basis of what they believe to be true about themselves. Now, family interaction includes all the real or symbolic forms of communicating. Nonverbal gestures, hello, I'm here, I'm not here, I'm involved, I come quick, and so on. When there are differences between the interaction that children see about themselves, talk them through and solve them. A child might have the following observation. I can tell when I have done something Dad doesn't like, he becomes quiet and won't talk. Now think about that. So every time the dad doesn't talk, then the child might think, well, he thinks I've done something wrong. Now, addressing family interaction helps children process what they're experiencing about gender. Suppose you found out that a boy believed that every time his dad was silent, he had done something the dad didn't like. What would you do about that? Well, obviously, you'd say, well, that's not true, and let's talk about it. And then you'd probably find exceptions to his belief in order to disconfirm that. Now, when we're talking about family interaction or communication, it is important for you to appreciate that families form patterned or ritualized communication, including a speaking order and emotions related to specific topics such as money, friends, work, or rules. Now, what that means is that when the family talks about money, this person talks, followed by another person, who then interrupts, and then another person, and so on. These are ritualized patterns of speaking order. It might also be the case that if you were talking about money like that if you've ever argued over that, when money comes up, so does anger and frustration. Now, knowing how to participate in these patterns, even those that are not healthy, is part of family membership. Now, being part of family interaction can signal high status and importance, and being left out of interaction can signal dismissal. One of my sisters one time heard about one of the brothers, and he'd said something to me in confidence, and she said, "Did you know about that?" And I said, "I did." And she said, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" And I said, "Well, I know you expect to be communicated with, but he asked me to keep it confidential." And then I said to her, "You know what? You have my permission to keep quiet about a lot of things that you know about me that are not positive," and we both laughed. Now, let me give you some examples of the knowledge children acquire from their family interaction, which depends on their family experience. And on a piece of paper, you might want to make a note of which of the following accurately describes what you believe your children are learning about themselves. Here are some things that they could believe. They think of themselves as male or female with more optimism than pessimism. We would like that, so that they value, being a male or female. They meet people confidently rather than avoid others with anxiety. We want that to happen. We also want them to use a larger, more fluent vocabulary than reticence to communicate. When they have a larger, more fluent vocabulary, they have more ways to talk about themselves and how it might apply. We want all boys and girls to communicate about and understand feelings. We hope they will communicate positively to themselves about themselves, expresses love and gratitude, shares compliments and so on, rather than criticize, blame, and condemn. We also want them to know times to communicate and times to not communicate. All right, the next thing I want to point out is called family emotional exchanges. Family members have many different types of emotional exchanges, and many of these are related to gender. So, for example, a boy might be taught that when he's speaking with a girl, he needs to adjust his voice tone. And a girl might be taught, to not be catty or sarcastic. These are examples of adjusting your communication and emotional exchanges. Now, keep in mind that family members typically feel strongly attached to each other, and this is an attachment bond, and when positive, is the emotional tie that both parents and children feel forever after. It exerts influence from pregnancy onward, as a matter of fact. Some children have greater or lesser attachment with their families, and some who miss the attachment experience often have difficulty with people thereafter. So, as is true, all family members learn to observe and experience a variety of positive and negative emotions. They may or may not come in contact with empathy, compassion, gratitude, love, kindness, comforting, and consoling. Well, what does this have to do with gender? A lot. As it turns out, we'd like people of both genders to have empathy, compassion, gratitude, love, kindness, comforting, and consoling. But they need to see examples, and they need to actually experience these forms of emotional behavior, and otherwise they will develop into a person who doesn't have access to these emotional exchanges. Now, at the conclusion of this episode, I want to remind you that I've reviewed today the first experience area, which is the development of the inner core, and then I've introduced the second experience area, which is the family as a small community where there's interaction with family members, there are family emotional exchanges, and on the next episode I'm going to give specific examples of how these can be applied by you as parents to promote the gender identity of your children.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the First Answers podcast, which is sponsored by firstanswers.com, where you can find new tools for families and parents of 21st century kids with a focus on emotional self-reliance. Find First Answers on Facebook, and remember to subscribe to stay up to date with new episodes. Give us a rating and write a review on the podcast app or Google Podcasts, and let us know what you think about First Answers. Check out another podcast by Dr. Scoresby called The Christ Questions, which is centered on questions we ask about Jesus Christ and questions he asks us. Dr. Scoresby examines how Christians can build faith in Jesus Christ that lasts and discover the true blessings and rewards for believing.